I started off as a print journalist 7 years ago. I worked for a number of different companies, and it was in the middle of one particular stint as the music editor of a major national U.S. publication called Spin. I realized that I was very frustrated with the print journalism business. I realized that it had come to a point where I felt it was moribund, and even more frightening, I watched as other colleagues, and specifically female colleagues, at about the same age, I'm in my 20s, we were all experiencing the same thing. We felt that the media companies that we tended to work for, it was becoming increasingly difficult to work for them. It was harder to get our bylines in print. It was harder to get good assignments, and more importantly, people were getting laid off. It was the downturn of the magazine business to some extent. This was in 1992. And it was around that time that I realized that my interest in telling stories to some extent was affected by my MTV-generated hummingbird attention span. That I felt that there was a better way to tell a story, and that it wasn't relegated simply to static text and image. So after thinking about it, and after spending a little bit of time figuring out what I wanted to do, I knew that there was a way to incorporate multimedia in the development of a new type of publication, and also that the technology existed in order to carry that out. So basically that's how I began developing Blender. And Blender itself became the first pop cultural magazine entirely on CD-ROM disc. There's no paper counterpart to Blender. It was conceived entirely as a multimedia format magazine. And I think what I'll do now is I'm going to give you just a brief little taste of what this looks like and explain to you a little bit about how it works. Blender basically was conceived as a digital version of what a magazine would eventually look like. It is formatted, the interface that I developed worked along the lines of traditional magazine interface, in the sense that it has 3 departmental sections. It has a front of book, a feature well, and a back of book. And basically incorporating the standard text and image elements with graphics, animation, video, and audio by sending reporters out with high-8 video cameras, which are fairly cheap to get, instead of just pens and pads. I was able to basically start developing a new type of media force. And all of this was basically it was done to try to reach a new audience, an audience that was essentially, I do believe, and I've said this before, that I think there is a generation that has been born already that finds it rather strange to read books or magazines that are paper-based, that often will get their information more readily from their computers and through computer monitors. What you're seeing right now is the table of contents for Blender. Icebox, fixtures, and microwave in keeping with the lo-fi Blender household appliance motif. By taking your cursor and rolling it over each of these sections, you can enter separate content sections. Microwave is a typical back of book section. It's where you keep your reviews and horoscopes. I tried to make concessions to standard print elements so that first-time users, which I knew my audience would be conceived of entirely almost for first-time users, that it wouldn't be as much of a leap for them to understand what we were trying to do. Music reviews here pointed out one thing that I grappled with when I was at Spin. How do you get an audience to understand what you're talking about when what you're doing is merely citing your own opinion? By developing digital and multimedia technology, it allows you an opportunity to actually convey an opinion, but also give the user an opportunity to add their own opinion. What we have here is the standard music review section. I broke up the interface into 5 categories, mostly for ease of legibility. There are 25 music reviews in this section, and it's very hard to list 25 records on one screen. So by clicking each icon, here we'll go to, by clicking on each icon, you can actually enter a separate section, which will list the 5 records reviewed in that category. By clicking on the review you want to choose, you can actually read the review. But and this was the fun part. And the point that I really yearned for when I was at Spin, you can actually read your review. You can scroll through your review, but at the same time you're actually reading the review, you can hear the music. So a 20-second sample of the record being played. You can scroll back and forth in the review. And for those who need visual stimulation, click on the video button. You can actually see a video interview that was done with the artist that is being profiled in the review. Turn the sound up a little bit.
If I saw things through my eyes in their terms, that's what the words would be. You know, I guess everything is suspect in my eyes.
Part of the development of Blender also involved developing online advertising. I did conceive of this as an advertising revenue supported publication, which, sorry, just go back here. Click the wrong button. It was an advertising revenue supported publication, which meant that at the time when I started this, most people didn't even know what a CD-ROM was, although of course everybody does, or everybody should by now. But at the time, this was all pretty alien, and for advertisers, it was even more difficult to get them to understand how to develop electronic advertising. So in some ways, I basically had to breach the wall between church and state and basically handle both editorial and advertising functions in the sense that I developed all the advertising as well. So this is an ad for a New York-based BBS all about music called SonicNet. And the ads that were done are all pretty different. This basically tells you a little bit about SonicNet. You have some cute little interactive features here, little mosh pit, which gives you a bit more information. It's in keeping with the indie audience that this appeals to. And you can play around with it. It's all interactive. Leave. When you're finished with this ad, it takes you back to the table of contents, so that we try to keep it as unintrusive as possible. I'll take you to one more thing just to show you quickly. Show you horoscope, a digital horoscope that I developed. But basically with Blender, most of the reason that I really needed to create this was because that I felt that I wasn't getting the sense that I was empowered by the media companies that I was working for, and felt that if I wanted to feel like I was a part of the media, that I was going to have to go out and create my own. And which is not easy, but it's certainly a lot easier in terms of being able to control. I mean, the great thing about the digital workplace, to give you an example, this is a horoscope. By clicking on your star sign in the primary interface, you have pop stars read you your individual horoscope using video.
Since there may be that danger lurking this month, a marriage or new birth in your family is predicted by the stars.
And there are all sorts of other features in here. Here's another online ad that I developed for Philips Interactive Media. With Blender, I was trying to essentially act upon what I saw as a trend that people weren't taking advantage of at the time. I wanted to break free of the hold that I felt, and also other writers that I knew. Most of the writers that I had worked with eventually wound up becoming videographers for Blender and worked with me either as contributors. There are all sorts of departmental sections within the magazine. There are interactive cartoon soap operas, there are features. There's even a cooking program on Blender. We had a resident chef, a Hell's Angel biker, who actually cooked only with chili peppers that included both savory dishes and desserts. And you actually see the video of him cooking, and there's a printable function so you could print out recipe cards. And basically, Blender was created as an all-purpose type of publication. In the 1 year that I did it, though, I realized a lot of things. Number one, that CD-ROM is not necessarily the best format for producing ongoing frequency media. That the rise of online media was definitely going to give recorded media a run for its money. And this was done before even Netscape appeared on the scene. In the time since, it's been incredible sort of dealing with some of the changes within the media marketplace, but there are still some aspects that I think are universal, whether we're dealing with either recorded media or online media. One of those things being that the great thing about digital media, of course, is that it does empower the individual. Someone like Justin or myself, I mean, if we really want to create the media, we'll just go out and do it. We can break the hold of the oligarchy of the Time Warners, the NBCs, the CBSs, the Condé Nast and Times Mirrors, if we feel that we're not being empowered by them. And there's a real opportunity now to take advantage of this new audience, this new generation that does understand how to use digital media, how to create content for digital media, and to actually work together with them in order to basically power your current publications into the future. There is one caveat, though, and I think there is a scenario here for the future. I think the rise of digital media does, to some degree, exacerbate some of the same problems that I experienced, and that basically served as the impetus for developing Blender in the first place, which is I'm seeing fewer and fewer women developing media, and it is increasingly difficult for them to get their voices heard within the digital media marketplace. There are quite a lot of women, gosh, I mean, there are people like Jane Metcalf at Wired, Rochelle Udell at Condé Nast. There are quite a few women involved in developing new media. However, this is something which is definitely going to have to change beyond the confines of people creating media for the so-called Nintendo generation. Clearly, because you'd be missing out on half your market if you were to do so, and that's certainly something that I come from a magazine background. The magazine publishing business, well, if they were to ignore their female audience, that would basically effectively wipe out a good percentage of the current magazines being published. So I suppose here's really a challenge. There are new technologies being formed all the time. I left Blender. What I'm working on right now is developing a new technology standard called CD+. And I'm also working together with America Online and New Line Television to develop web-based television programming. I put television programming in brackets because it's not really television. But I do think that in developing these new technologies, these new standards, these new formats, and these new ways of disseminating information, that we're going to have to be very careful about who we're actually marketing to and how we plan to market. Some guy who basically develops games for 15 and 16-year-old boys probably doesn't know how to develop media that's going to make me think, oh, okay, this is something that I would want to buy into. This is something I would want to pay 5 cents for and download from the web. Which is not to say that I wouldn't read your column, Stephen, because it was the only reason why I read Macworld. But I do think that we are going to have to pay particular attention to how we develop the media marketplace for the future, because this is a very crucial time right now. And if you don't do something about it, then we'll do something about it. And that goes without. Basically, all you need at this point is a computer and an idea. It's certainly not as simplistic as I'm making it, but with a good idea and with an understanding of how to develop media, the channels are currently in place and existing to actually develop your own media formats. And that's something that I think everyone right now in the publishing business is going to have to seriously think about. Thanks very much. I think news still holds the same place that it did, before digital media became important. I think that it's still current events and factual stories, but I think the question may be better asked of this audience. I watch as people like Rupert Murdoch and people who control large media corporations change news to reflect what they feel will get them increased circulations. And going back to what GK said, how does that relate to someone in our age group? I think plenty of magazines and newspapers have already found out that they aren't exactly getting the mark when it comes to a younger audience that is savvier about what news is.
It should be much easier for women now to become, active on the internet.
Well, yes, if a woman decides to take the initiative. What I was actually referring to was what media companies are actually doing to build women into their new media efforts, in terms of pushing the peanut forward on what they're trying to do as far as moving their current print-based publications into a new age, because there's still, I mean, the statistics are pretty frightening as far as the number of women who hold upper-level executive and managerial positions on editorial-based publications. You know, it's not an equitable situation, and the statistics are even scarier when you enter the new media arena. That's what I was trying to speak to. As far as doing it for yourself, well, most of the women I know are trying to launch their own publications and doing it by themselves, because it's a lot easier doing it that way than trying to go through the established route of working together with established media companies.
So why are you the only female speaker here in this conference?
That's a really good question.
What's your circulation?
For Blender?
Yeah.
Well, we burned 10,000 units per edition. I put out 2 editions and then I left. So, and it's up in the air as to whether or not it's going to continue publishing. So, that's a whole other story. Investors, lawyers, and contracts.
The other side.
4 out of 5 new businesses in this country today are started by women, and they're small companies, and they're coming, Gottfried, they're coming. They're silent, but listen to the footsteps
I'm looking forward
behind
to
you.
the next conference.